In the winter of 1219, the largest army Central Asia had ever seen crossed the Tian Shan Mountains and descended upon the richest empire in the Islamic world. 100,000 Mongol riders advanced in endless columns, raising a cloud of dust that darkened the horizon like a storm born from the earth itself. Their target was Bukhara, Samarkand, the jewels of the Silk Road. And behind each column, 3 or 4 riderless horses trotted in silence, waiting their turn, because a Mongol warrior never rode a single horse, never stopped, never rested. But on the walls of those cities, the defenders watched the horizon with a confidence that would soon turn to ash. They were the heirs of a mighty empire, protected by garrisons of tens of thousands of men, by walls as thick as mountains, by centuries of civilization that had withstood invaders before. They did not fear the nomads of the steppe. And then the silence shattered. Arrows fell from the sky like black rain. Catapults roared from impossible angles. Riders appeared from the north, from the south, from behind hills where no one expected them. They retreated. The defenders rushed out to pursue them. And when they believed victory was theirs, the entire world closed in around them. Heavy cavalry emerged from nowhere. Mounted archers twisted in their saddles and fired without stopping. The ground trembled. Banners fell. Screams drowned in dust and blood. When the last wall crumbled and the smoke cleared over the ruins of what had been one of the most splendid cities in the world, an entire empire lay shattered. And the echo of that destruction would resound across continents and centuries, because what the world had just witnessed was not simply a conquest. It was the birth of the most devastating military machine humanity had ever known, and its secret rode on 4 legs. To understand how a people of nomadic herders could build the largest land empire in history, one must first look at the land that forged them. The Mongolian steppe is an ocean of grass that stretches beyond what the human eye can encompass. A landscape where the sky weighs more than the earth, where the wind knows no obstacles, and where temperatures swing between the scorching heat of summer and a winter cold, capable of freezing the blood in one's veins. There are no cities, no walls, no shelter, only the infinite horizon and the animals that roam it. In this brutal and beautiful world, the Mongols learned the 2 skills that would make them invincible: riding a horse and shooting a bow. A Mongol child learned to ride before he could walk steadily. By the age of 3, he could hold himself on a horse. By 5, he was shooting arrows at hares from the saddle. By 14, he was a soldier. The steppe did not tolerate weakness. Every hunt was military training, every seasonal migration a logistical exercise, every storm survived, a lesson in endurance. The Mongols did not train for war. They lived war from the moment they were born. The Mongol horse was an extraordinary creature. Small compared to the steeds of Europe or Arabia, with short legs and a compact body, it appeared insignificant next to the mounts of sedentary armies. But what it lacked in stature, it made up for with superhuman endurance. It could cover more than 100 kilometers in a single day. It survived on grass found beneath the snow. It endured temperatures that would have killed any horse raised in stables. And each Mongol warrior carried 3 or 4 of these animals with him, rotating them during the march so that none would become exhausted. While European armies advanced at 30 kilometers per day and required enormous supply trains, the Mongols could cover double or triple that distance, feeding on the dried meat they carried beneath their saddles, and on the blood they drew with small cuts on the necks of their own horses. They were a force of nature in human form, and the world was not prepared for them. But before there was a Mongol army, there were the tribes, dozens of clans scattered across the steppe, locked in a perpetual war of grudges, betrayals, and vendettas that lasted generations. The Merkits against the Tatars, the Naimans against the Kirites, the Mongols against everyone. And in the midst of that chaos, around the year 1162, a child named Temujin was born. Legend says he came into the world clutching a blood clot in his fist, an omen of a warrior, but his childhood was anything but glorious. His father, Yesugei, a minor chieftain of the Borjigin clan, was poisoned by the Tatars when Temujin was barely 8 years old. Without a protector, his family was abandoned by their own clan. They were left alone on the steppe, surviving on roots, mice, and fish. The future conqueror of the world knew hunger before glory. He knew betrayal before loyalty. And when his half-brother threatened to dominate the family, Temujin killed him with an arrow. He was 13 years old. That primordial hardness defined him. He was not a man born in the purple, but a survivor forged by loss, humiliation, and an iron will that would not accept surrender. When his wife Borte was kidnapped by the Merkits, Temujin did not crumble. He forged alliances, he gathered warriors, and he rescued her with a ferocity that made clear to the steppe that this young man was not like the others. Each victory attracted more followers. Each demonstration of generosity toward the loyal and merciless cruelty toward traitors built a reputation that grew like a fire in dry grass. What distinguished Temujin from every tribal chief who preceded him was a vision that transcended the clan. Where other leaders ruled by blood and lineage, he ruled by merit. He destroyed the old tribal aristocracy. He promoted warriors based on their valor and loyalty, not their birth. A herder could become a general. A prisoner could become a commander. This silent revolution broke the tribal bonds that had kept the steppe fragmented for centuries and created something that had never existed before, a unified Mongol nation. In the year 1206, on the banks of the Onon River, an assembly of steppe leaders proclaimed Temujin as Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. He was approximately 44 years old. Nearly 1 million people from the unified tribes attended the ceremony, setting up camps that stretched as far as the eye could see. And in that moment the world changed, though it did not yet know it. The first thing Genghis Khan did was transform the very structure of his people into a war machine. He organized all Mongols into decimal units, groups of 10 warriors, which formed companies of 100, which grouped into regiments of 1,000, which composed divisions of 10,000 called tumans. Each level had its commander, chosen by ability, not by blood. The chain of command was crystalline. Orders flowed from the Khan to the last rider with a speed and precision that no medieval army could match. But the true genius did not lie in the organization. It lay in the tactics. The Mongol composite bow was a weapon of astonishing engineering, built from layers of horn, wood, animal sinew, and birch bark, bonded together with fish bladder glue. It was shorter than the English longbow, which allowed it to be fired from the saddle, but its power was devastating. A Mongol archer could launch an arrow with precision at 150 meters and strike enemy formations at more than 300, and he could do it at full gallop, releasing the reins with both hands, guiding the horse only with his legs, firing at the exact instant when all 4 of the animal's hooves left the ground. Each warrior carried 2 or 3 bows and at least 60 arrows with tips hardened in brine. He was, in effect, a tank mounted on a horse, capable of destroying the enemy without the enemy being able to touch him. Mongol battle tactics transformed these individual skills into a lethal symphony. The most characteristic maneuver was the feigned retreat, the deception that destroyed more armies than any other strategy in military history. The Mongols would attack with an apparently small force, unleash a rain of arrows, and then withdraw in seeming panic. Enemy armies, believing they had achieved victory, would launch a disorganized pursuit. For days, sometimes, the Mongols would flee, drawing their pursuers ever further from their supply lines, stretching their formations, separating the fastest from the slowest. And when the enemy was completely dispersed, exhausted and confident, the Mongols would turn as a single beast. Heavy cavalry would emerge from the flanks, mounted archers would close the circle, and what had been a victorious pursuit became a massacre. Another devastating tactic was the tulugma, the double envelopment. Heavy cavalry would advance through the center, drawing the enemy's attention, while light cavalry units moved along the flanks in wide arcs, sometimes so extended they were invisible. When the enemy concentrated its forces against the center, the flanks would close like the jaws of a wolf. This maneuver was a military version of the Nerj, the great hunt in which the Mongols surrounded herds of wild animals in a circle that gradually tightened. What worked with deer worked with armies. Psychological warfare was another fundamental pillar. Before each campaign, Genghis Khan deployed a network of spies, merchants, and infiltrated deserters who gathered information about enemy forces, their internal divisions, their political weaknesses, and the disposition of their defenses. He knew his enemy better than the enemy knew itself, and he used that knowledge with calculated cruelty. Cities that surrendered without a fight were treated with relative clemency. Cities that resisted were razed to their foundations, and their inhabitants massacred as a warning to the next one. News of the destruction traveled faster than the Mongol army itself. When the riders arrived at the gates of the next city, terror had already done half the work. Many fortresses surrendered without firing an arrow, paralyzed by the fear of a fate they had heard from the lips of refugees. Genghis Khan ordered his soldiers to light 5 campfires for each warrior on the eve of battle, multiplying the appearance of his army 5-fold. He mounted dummies on the spare horses so that his columns would seem endless. He raised clouds of dust by dragging branches behind the horses to simulate phantom armies. Every deception was designed for a single purpose, so that the enemy would never know how many they were, where they were coming from, or when they would attack. The first great demonstration of this power came with the invasion of the Jurchen Jin Empire in northern China. But it was the campaign against the Khwarezmian Empire between 1219 and 1221 that revealed to the world the true magnitude of the Mongol machine. Shah Muhammad II of Khwarezm ruled an empire that stretched from the Caspian Sea to the Hindu Kush, with cities that were wonders of the Islamic world: Bukhara, Samarkand, Merv, Nishapur, centers of knowledge, commerce, and culture that had flourished for centuries. The war began with an insult. Genghis Khan had sent a caravan of merchants to the Khwarezmian Empire seeking to establish trade relations. The governor of the border city of Otrar executed them and confiscated their goods. Genghis then sent ambassadors demanding justice. The Shah executed them too, one of them beheaded, the others sent back with their beards shaved as humiliation. For a people who considered ambassadors sacred and inviolable, the insult was unforgivable. Genghis Khan assembled between 100,000 and 150,000 warriors, the largest army he had ever commanded, and divided his forces into multiple columns that would attack from different directions. While his son Jochi and General Jebe ravaged the Fergana Valley from the north, drawing the defenders' attention, Chagatai and Ogadei besieged Otrar from the east. And Genghis Khan, with his youngest son Tolui, executed one of the most audacious maneuvers in military history. He crossed the Kizilkum Desert, a wasteland the defenders considered impassable, and appeared directly before Bukhara, in the empire's rear, where no one expected him. The fall of Bukhara was swift and brutal. The garrison attempted a desperate sortie and was annihilated in open combat. The city surrendered. Genghis Khan entered the great mosque, climbed the pulpit, and declared to the inhabitants that he was the punishment of God sent upon them for their sins. It was not empty rhetoric. It was psychological warfare in its purest form. Samarkand, the capital, fell shortly after. Despite its formidable fortifications and a garrison of tens of thousands of men, Mongol tactics proved unstoppable. Genghis Khan used prisoners as human shields in the assaults. He feigned a retreat that drew half the garrison outside the walls, where they were slaughtered in open combat. He sent forged letters in the name of the Shah's mother and the Shah himself, sowing confusion and paralysis among the enemy commanders. In a matter of weeks, the largest city in Central Asia had fallen. What followed was destruction of biblical proportions. Tolui marched into Khorasan and razed Merv, Nishapur and Herat, three of the largest and most cultured cities in the world. Muslim chroniclers, writing under the shadow of horror, recorded death tolls that modern historians consider exaggerated, but that reflect the magnitude of the trauma. Entire civilizations were erased. Irrigation systems that had sustained life for centuries were destroyed, turning fertile lands into deserts that never fully recovered. Meanwhile, Generals Subutai and Jebe pursued Shah Muhammad II across Persia in one of the most extraordinary rides in history. The man who had ruled an empire from the Caspian to Afghanistan died alone, sick and defeated on an island in the Caspian Sea, while Mongol hooves echoed on the shore. His son, Jalal al-Din, attempted to regroup the Khwarezmian forces and achieved a remarkable victory over a Mongol general at the Battle of Parwan. But Genghis Khan came personally and crushed his army at the Battle of the Indus, forcing him to flee to India. But Subutai and Jebe did not stop. With barely 20,000 riders, they crossed the Caucasus, defeated the Georgians, decimated the Cuman tribes, and reached the steppes of southern Russia, where they faced a coalition of Slavic princes and Cumans on the banks of the Kalka River on the 31st of May, 1223. The Russians assembled an army that some sources estimate at 80,000 men, though the real figure was likely smaller, with many inexperienced warriors. The Mongols numbered barely 20,000. It did not matter. Subutai executed the feigned retreat with terrifying precision. For 9 days, the Mongols fled. The Russian princes, confident and disorganized, pursued them across the steppe, stretching their lines, separating their contingents, exhausting their forces. And when the Russian army reached the Kalka River, dispersed and spent, the Mongols turned. The Cumans, who knew nomadic tactics, fled at the first contact, crashing through the Russian lines and sowing chaos. Mongol cavalry charged from the flanks. Mounted archers unleashed devastating volleys from distances that Russian weapons could not reach. Formations shattered. The princes tried to regroup, but it was already too late. What had been an army became a mass of men trapped between the river, the hills, and an enemy attacking from every direction simultaneously. Grand Prince Mstislav of Kiev entrenched himself in a fortified camp and held out for 3 days before surrendering under a promise of safe conduct. The Mongols accepted the surrender, and then they executed everyone. Mstislav and the other captured princes were laid on the ground, planks were placed over their bodies, and the Mongol generals celebrated a victory feast sitting atop the boards, while the princes were slowly crushed to death beneath them. Mongol tradition forbade the spilling of royal blood. It did not forbid suffocating it. When the echoes of battle faded over the banks of the Kalka, the silence that remained was not peace, it was horror. 20,000 riders had destroyed an army 3 or 4 times their size, not through brute force, but through a tactical intelligence the world had never seen. And then, with the same speed with which they had appeared, the Mongols departed eastward, rejoining Genghis Khan after a reconnaissance expedition of more than 8,000 kilometers that had lasted 3 years. The campaign had been a resounding success, and it was merely a warning. The survivors of those battles, the refugees from those cities, the chroniclers who recorded those horrors, all asked themselves the same question: how was this possible? How could a people without cities, without weapons factories, without siege engineers, without naval fleets, conquer empires that had been established for centuries? The answer lay in everything that conventional armies could neither comprehend nor replicate: The Mongols did not fight the way their enemies expected. They did not form rigid lines that crashed against other rigid lines. They did not depend on heavy infantry or the armored knights that dominated warfare in Europe and the Middle East. Their power resided in speed, flexibility, and deception. A Mongol army could cover 130 kilometers in 2 days, a distance that a medieval army would need a week to traverse. They could split into independent columns, operating hundreds of kilometers apart, and regroup at a predetermined point with a synchronization that would astonish modern military planners. Their courier system, the Yam, with relay stations stocked with fresh horses and supplies, allowed messages to be transmitted across the entire empire at a speed no other civilization could match. And most importantly, they learned. The Mongols were not proud. When they encountered a superior technology or tactic, they adopted it without hesitation. From the Chinese, they took catapults, siege engines, and the engineers who operated them. From the Persians, administrative systems. From every conquered people, the artisans, the physicians, the specialists who could strengthen the empire's machine. While other conquerors destroyed what they did not understand, the Mongols absorbed it. It was a ruthless pragmatism that respected neither traditions nor prejudices, only results. When the last cloud of dust settled over the battlefields and the razed cities, when the world processed what had happened, the magnitude of the Mongol achievement revealed itself in all its dimensions. Genghis Khan died in August of 1227 during a campaign against the Tangut kingdom of Xixia. He was approximately 65 years old. He had been born as an orphan, rejected by his clan, had survived hunger, slavery, and betrayal, and had built an empire that stretched from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea, encompassing more than 23 million square kilometers, the largest contiguous land empire in history. But his legacy transcended territorial conquest. What Genghis Khan created was a system, a military, logistical, and administrative system so efficient that it continued to expand for decades after his death, under his sons and grandsons, until it reached the gates of Vienna in the west, the forests of Java in the south, and the coasts of Japan in the east. A system that connected the world along the Silk Road with unprecedented security, enabling the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies between civilizations that had never before been in contact. A system that, paradoxically, sowed destruction and also created the conditions for a global interconnection that foreshadowed the modern world. The secret of the Mongol cavalry was never a single secret. It was the convergence of dozens of factors that no other people managed to combine. The resilience forged on the steppe, the composite bow fired at full gallop, the tireless horses rotated without pause, the decimal organization that transformed tribes into armies, the tactics of deception perfected through generations of hunting, the absolute discipline that executed complex maneuvers with pinpoint precision, the military intelligence that knew the enemy before encountering him, the psychological warfare that defeated him before touching him, and a leader whose vision turned a fragmented people into the most feared force on the planet. Today, 800 years later, Mongol horses still gallop across the same steppes where it all began. The wind still blows without obstacles over the endless grass. And on every hill, in every valley, in every expanse of open sky, the echo of those hooves remains. Not as a memory of destruction, but as a testament to what is possible when a people forges its will on the hardest anvil that exists, survival itself. The empires that believed themselves eternal fell before them like grass before the storm. The walls that believed themselves invincible crumbled like sand. And the world learned in blood and in awe that true strength does not reside in the size of armies or the thickness of walls. It resides in the speed of lightning, in the patience of the wolf, and in the hearts of those who were born riding.